I think the dance. Oh man, the chick that ever did cheek. Now listen, dear God,
In the 20th century, throughout the Progressive Era, the Harlem Renaissance, and World War I and II, there was one person who stood out from the pack, in the very fact that he was an African-American musician and was succeeding on all formats in the entertainment industry. Eubie Blake, a venerated ragtime piano player, accomplished more than just making great music. He broke boundaries in the music industry and society, and would later go on to disprove the claim that African Americans required the aid of blackface to be successful in the entertainment industry. Eubie Blake faced conflicts and had compromises in his life that he overcame, which effectively placed him into a category all his own.
My mother and father were slaves. But I hold no malice. None whatsoever.
Isn't that
You know why?
Why?
But my father told me everybody that's in the world wants to be somebody, right?
Eh?
All right. Well, when you were owned slaves, you were somebody. See? In the South.
Right.
And my father told me, never bite the hand that's feeding you. And you people feed us, don't you? Right.
Though a controversial statement, this was an ideology Eubie Blake followed throughout his life that allowed him to view others as equals. In Baltimore, Maryland, born on February 7, 1883, James Hubert Blake was born to former slaves John Sumner Blake and Emily Johnston Blake. At the tender age of 4, Eubie Blake was already showing signs of his determination to be somebody. And so started Eubie Blake's venture into ragtime. Eubie Blake had a mother more strict than most. While he did get the opportunity to learn and to play the piano from a next-door neighbor, he couldn't play music his mother deemed ungodly, and during this time, ragtime was considered a sin in itself. Eubie Blake, unable to be deterred, kept on sneaking himself private lessons with the piano organ his family paid 25 cents a week for. In 1899, at the age of 15, without his mother's consent or knowledge, Eubie Blake got a job at Aggie Shelton's bordello. Needless to say, when Emily Blake heard the news that her son was sneaking out at night, she was not pleased. She would have had him punished, whipped, and forgetting all about his ragtime career, had not Eubie Blake's father, John Sumner Blake, stepped in and made the two come to a compromise. On one hand, with the money Eubie made, the family gained an ever-improving standard of living, and on the other, Eubie Blake got his ragtime. In the years to follow his compromise with his mother, Eubie Blake would travel across the nation, moving from one job to another as his skill with the piano progressed immensely. During his travels, Eubie Blake would meet many new people and many acquaintances, like Lieutenant James Reese Europe of the 369th Infantry. In July of 1910, Eubie Blake would marry former childhood friend Avis Lee. Most importantly, in the years to come, Eubie Blake would meet Nobel Sissel. Nobel Sissel, a famous lyricist of the time, was born on July 10, 1889 in Indianapolis, Indiana. With the inner workings of James Reese Europe, Nobel Sissel and Eubie Blake became a dynamic duo that relied upon each other to create music. It was in 1915, right after their first meeting, that Eubie Blake and Nobel Sissel decided to form a vaudeville act as partners. During World War I, vaudevilles were a kernel of theatrical entertainment consisting of individual performances, acts, and mixed numbers as performed by comedians, singers, acrobats, magicians, and actors. Development of the time, that Eubie Blake and Nobel Sissel were able to walk out on stage and proceed with their show. The name wasn't the only feature that set them apart, however. they performed without blackface, which was the practice of blackening the skin and exaggerating the lips, often with the use of other accessories to match. Instead, they performed in tuxedos. In doing this, they were some of the first people to go against the accepted stereotype in society of African Americans at the time. Sissel, a singer/lyricist, Flournoy E. Miller, a choreographer, and Aubrey. It was at the Maryland Theater in Baltimore that Eubie Blake and Nobel Sissel received this very specific backlash. This was the instance where Nobel Sissel and Eubie Blake were seen backstage by the stage manager, and he looked at them with wonder at the fact that they had not applied burnt cork to darken their skin. They had decided to stand up for what they believed in. They were not going to bow down to the oppressive use of blackface. And then suddenly, seconds after the stage manager's find, their cue has come. They walk out on stage, perform their piece, and in the minutes to follow, nobody wants to go on after them. With a decked out suit and a big smile, they walked off stage. This example was an amazing development of the time. That Eubie Blake and Nobel Sissel were able to walk out on stage, proceed with their show, and walk off stage was a miraculous event of the times. In the years leading up to 1921, no one could have guessed what was about to hit Broadway. In the collaborative efforts between Eubie Blake, a piano player, Nobel Sissel, a singer/lyricist, Flournoy E. Miller, a choreographer, and Aubrey Lyles, a dancer, an all-African American cast produced the title Shuffle Along. Shuffle Along was a production that wasn't supposed to happen. They didn't have any costumes until they got old sweat-stained ones from the longtime Broadway production Roly Poly Eyes. They had some money, but Broadway requires a lot of money. They had to cut down numbers and sets because of how expensive everything was getting to be. This production was not supposed to see the light of day, and most people at the time didn't think it would either. Yet somehow Shuffle Along managed to become the hit of 1921. Eubie Blake and everybody behind Shuffle Along had just proved that there is no barrier beyond the use of blackface. In the many decades before his death in 1983 of old age, Eubie Blake would follow his ideology and become a father of ragtime. In Eubie's life, he accomplished many things, but I think the greatest thing that Eubie has accomplished is that he stood up for what he believed in, and in doing so set an example for all to follow.
Fate may lead us astray, my darling, mark what I say. Love will find. I can't make that high note.